check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome to The Game Changer by Empowerhouse Coaching, your podcast to master the mental game, elevate your brilliance, and build a legacy of progress and impact. My name is Amanda Escobedo. I'm your host and your inner game coach, here to help you change the game. Welcome to, what are we, episode 16? My goodness, we've been doing this for 16 weeks. Time just flies. Happy New Year, everybody. Last time we talked, it was Christmas, and it is now the new year. For the New Year's, I went for a run at midnight, like a crazy person, past my bedtime. I was very nervous on whether I was going to make it, and it was raining. But I do want to say it was probably one of the most empowering ways, from my perspective, to bring in the new year and really setting the new year with intention. You're setting it on a healthy note. You're going for a run. You're setting it with the mindset of hit the ground running, like run into 2026. And for me, that means hit the ground running, start executing, start moving. And so there was just a lot of intention around it, and I loved it because my dad joined. I met some friends for the Lululemon 5K, and it was all the way in Pasadena's. It was the Run with the Roses. I guess they do this every year. I just learned about it. And my dad, his old stomping grounds were in Pasadena, so I persuaded him to join. He didn't run. He was just kind of there as a supporter. Also protecting his mija. He was like, "You're driving there by yourself? You can't carpool with a friend. Why are you going by yourself?" So he drove as my protector. And it was nice to just have him there and be in his own stomping grounds of Pasadena. But, you know, I was kind of contemplating on my way to the run, like, is this something I'll do again? This is probably the last time I'll do this again. And actually, you know, letting all of that go and just showing up and being present, you know, there's magic that happens whenever you let go of expectations. The fun actually has the ability to surface because you're not so blocked around on how things should be. You're like, it's raining, it's cold. This is not what I want to be doing. It's past my bedtime. But once you just make a decision on something, like I made the decision to show up, and I want to share this intent with all of you. One of the coaching tools that we constantly talk about is letting go of expectations and also being decisive in decision making. There are probably many of you that get into analysis by paralysis. You go back and forth on your decision, or even after you make a decision, you're like thinking of all the reasons why this was maybe a bad decision and maybe you should retract your decision. And what we want to start practicing is just remove the noise of all the things. If someone asks you, in this case, do you want to go for a run for New Year's at midnight? Don't go through all the steps of, well, it's past my bedtime. I don't know if I want to drive that far. Like, remove all the noise and the narratives and just sit with your intuition and just say yes or say no. Literally, it's as simple as that. And just make a decision. You always have the, I'll say, opportunity to change your mind. But what we want to do is help use this as an opportunity to make you more decisive. And so I had already made the decision to go for the run, and I started to recognize my brain doing all these things. Is this something I really want to do? I was still going through the motion of getting ready. And I already knew I would never bail on going through this. I already made a commitment with my friends. I paid for it. It was something I was going to do. Why allow your brain to go through all the stories of why this could suck for you? And just come back to the here and now and be present. And I had to do the same thing in the talking with my dad. Love you, Dad, if you're listening. He had made the decision to come with me. And then it was going through, you should have done this. Why didn't you do this? You should have done this. Why did you choose to do this event? And I did. It's like, dude, you already said, let's go. Let's go. And I had the same narrative in my mind that I had to manage. And so this is just a share for all of you to help become more decisive in your decisions. If someone asks you something as simple like, hey, Tina, hey, Johnny, I'm going to Starbucks. Do you want a latte? And you go through the list now. It's New Year. Oh, well, I'm on a diet. Oh, well, I'm trying to eat well. Oh, well, I'm trying to save money. Remove the stories. Sit with your intuition. Yes or no. Yes or no. You can say yes, sure, get me a chai. And then once you get that chai and you drink it, you could decide, hey, I don't want to finish this. Don't finish it. But save yourself from all the stories and the indecisiveness and the analysis by paralysis. Just go with it. And now that we're in the new year, what I do want to do is help set some intentions for you all and kind of think through just some things that you should be doing. Well, I am all about hitting the ground running for 2026. If you did not take the opportunity to pause in December and set yourself up for success for 2026, I would recommend taking the month of January to do a couple different things. Number one, I started to do this in December. One is clear the clutter. If you follow my Instagram, you're like seeing all my progress of clearing the clutter. If you haven't noticed, part of my clearing the clutter has been the rearranging of the office. So if you're watching this on YouTube or even on Instagram, you'll notice my background looks different because I changed my office around. I was kind of tired of the energy I was feeling in this room. I didn't like the corner I was sitting in. There was a lot of stuff and equipment piling up. And I just went through my office and I was like, what equipment works and what doesn't? I bought replacement equipment for this. Why do I still have this? And so it was just going through all of that. I moved some furniture around so I had more storage space in here. And it just feels lighter. It feels energizing in here. So, one, clear the clutter, rearrange wherever necessary. Number two, what I'm going to be doing tomorrow is a deep cleaning. Now, for all of you that maybe have outsourced your deep cleaning, I highly recommend that. If you've got cleaners coming in, I did have someone and then she got another job. So I need a new cleaner. If anyone has any recommendations in Costa Mesa, please let me know. In the meantime, I've just been cleaning, but there's the deep clean, which is, vacuuming under your couch, moving it away from the door, from the wall. It is, the blinds, it's the dusting, it's doing all the cleaning out the refrigerator, do the deep cleaning. We're trying to bring in new energy. And the value of this, the value of deep cleaning, the value of cleaning out the clutter, if we're going to set intentions for 2026, you really have to clear out the old furniture in order to welcome the new. We have to bring in new energy, which means bringing out the old energy, the old juju. And so all the little priorities that are low priority in your life, you've been seeing all around your house, your inbox is filling up, your garage is filled. You're like, oh, I should really get to that. All those things where you have to schedule the doctor's appointments that you haven't done for over a year. You need to roll over your 401k from your past job that you haven't done for a couple of years. It's sitting in the old account. All these little things pile up for you and they take up mental real estate of your brain. And so, what we want to do is start to take action. I want you all to be like Nike and just do it. Pick something, an area of your life, whether it's moving the 401k over, whether it's scheduling the doctor's appointment, whether it's identifying an area of your office, whether it's your refrigerator. Find an area and just clear out that clutter so you can clear out the real estate in your brain. Just take action and do that darn thing. Another thing I recommend is doing 2025 reflections. Doing 2025 reflections really is a look back. So, if you've heard me talk through multiple times in this podcast, one of our superhuman powers is the ability to time travel. And that means time traveling to the past, and it also means time traveling to the future. The question, though, is how are you traveling? Are you traveling to past regrets? Are you beating yourself up? Are you jaded over something bad that someone did to you and you're just carrying that baggage and bringing it into every new circumstances? Those are negative ways that do not cultivate any type of growth, that do not cultivate any type of learning. Those are negative ways that keep you stuck in the past. More empowering ways to travel to the past is to reflect. Reflect has no pointing fingers of blaming at anyone, at yourself. There's no guilt in this at all. Reflect is intentional learning. And I don't want to say there isn't any guilt. You might feel some emotions. You might feel some embarrassment. You might actually feel some guilt with whatever it is that you've gone to the past. That's okay. What we want to do is take that emotion and transform it into an action. We want to watch the replay of our life and say what worked and what didn't. How do I want to pivot? What are the learnings and what's my new strategy moving forward? How do I want to move differently? And moving differently isn't about changing everybody around you. It's not about calling people out on all the things that they've been doing to you. It's about you moving differently around the world. Whether that means you're removing yourself from people, whether that means you are leading with more curiosity, whether that means asking more questions, whatever it means, just leading and moving differently. Really, flow, alignment is about facing the challenge, walking closer to the discomfort. And in relationships, walking closer to the discomfort is really about leading with curiosity, not with assumptions, and not leading with all your expectations on how you expect everyone to show up. Nobody around you is a mind reader. If you didn't know that, nobody around you can read your mind. And so it's really about leading your world with intention. And where you're not getting the result that you want, where other people are a part of the outcome that you're looking to have. It's about moving closer and communicating. So, coming back to one of the actions I want to challenge you all is 2025 reflections. I want you to sit and look back with your life and just ask yourself, did I accomplish what I set to accomplish in 2025? Did I even set any goals for 2025? Did I have any intention? If you didn't, maybe that's the pivot that you're doing for this year, for 2026, right? What did I set to? What did I achieve? What worked? What didn't? How do I want to move differently? It's so super simple. Grab a pen, grab a paper. You could do this on a laptop, but there's something a little different in my belief system or experience that I've had with pen to paper, and the wisdom flows a little differently rather than with the computer. But if you want to use the computer, you're welcome to use the computer. The other thing that I would highly recommend for you all is a vision board. And no, vision boards are not woo woo. Okay. Vision boards are an opportunity to dream big and set intentions. A lot of the time, goals that we set, which is going to be another task that I'm going to be challenging you with, are very realistic. And they're realistic for a reason, because we have to be able to execute on them, move on them. But the vision board helps us dream. It helps us put ideas, desires on a board that we feel are unimaginable, and we might even think are unreasonable, that will never happen to us. But you would never believe the type of work and flow that starts to happen in your energy by just subconsciously placing images and words on a board for yourself. And my best way to do a vision board, just like a 3-point step: one, have one side of your vision board be like all the pictures and the images and everything you want that's related to all areas of your life: health, relationships, finances, business, career, all of that stuff. Put it all and add real pictures of humans you know, of friends, of family you want to be a part of this vision of your life. The other side of this board should be your let go board. In order for you to manifest everything you want on this board, what would you need to let go of? And that's where you're writing out maybe self doubt, right? As an example of everything you need to let go to receive this. And then the last thing I like to do is write a letter to myself and staple it to the vision board. And writing a letter to yourself and stapling it to the vision board, what that really looks like is writing a letter from my future self. So, going back to, we have the ability to time travel, and this is the opportunity to travel to the future. And so, traveling to the future is tapping into your future self, your higher self, that's actually already manifested this, that's actually already living this life that you want to be living. And this future self is writing a letter to you today. It's giving you advice on everything you need to know, who you need to be, what you need to do, who you need to become, what you need to let go in order to manifest this. So write that letter to yourself. It's advice to yourself from your future self, who has everything you want, and staple it to that vision board. If you're local in town, hit me up, because I'm going to be hosting a vision board, a vision month. And then the other thing I would say would be really good for you is, now we want to turn this into an action plan, right? Is create some SMART goals. And if you aren't familiar with SMART goals, it's really an opportunity to be very specific on what you want to accomplish. You want to have it measurable. You want to have it achievable, realistic. I feel like I'm messing one up. Time bound, no, not realistic, relative, relatable to whatever it is that you're doing. My brain is, why can I not remember the R? But it needs to be like related to what you're trying to achieve, right? And so if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see some videos I'm going to be posting on this. And I'm also going to be posting some tools on my website related to all of this. So please follow my account on Empowerhouse_coaching. More to come. More videos are going to be shot out. I'm going through just 1, 2, 3 quick on this podcast, but you'll get more information if you follow my Instagram. And then last but not least, what you want to do after you create some SMART goals is really identify a focus area. Where are you going to begin? What I like to say is, you don't need 10 priorities. You just need one domino. And what that really means is, your SMART goals, you're going to have a bunch. But the question is, where do you start? Where do you begin? What is going to be the difference that makes a difference for yourself? And again, if you follow my handle, I'm going to give you some tools that are going to help you identify a focus area. If you want extra support this year, I can also help. You are welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to walk through any of these, go take you through a free session, and we can actually walk through a focus session together, SMART goals together. We can do a regular breakthrough. Whatever it is, I'm happy to help. Always know that you have a support and accountability buddy right here. And you can always just send me a message if you go to my website on empowerhousecoaching.co. Once again, empowerhousecoaching.co. All right, that is my intro for you all, folks. As we have hit the new year, I have one story that I do want to review for us this year. And this is actually the story of the Minnesota $1 billion fraud scandal. This was actually published, at first was published on YouTube, which we'll get into, but this is really I'll say a breaking story that has been circulating nationally on waste, fraud, and abuse in public child care funding in Minnesota. And there are very loud narratives that have followed this story. Now, before I really dive deep into this story, I want to be crystal clear about the lane me as a coach in Powerhouse is actually taking on this story. So I want to be clear this episode is not political commentary. That is not the goal of reviewing this story. It's not about assigning blame to a political party, a community, or group at all. My goal is not to generate more outrage on what is happening in the world related to this story. From my perspective, my goal, at least my intent with this episode, is this is an episode of leadership. This is an episode of problem solving, creative problem solving, cultivating your creativity. Because whether you're running a startup, whether you're running a nonprofit, or you're in a government program, the questions that matter are really all the same. What has actually happened here? What circumstances have occurred? What are the facts versus the allegations? Where did the system break down and how do we solve for it? And the underlining all of it, how do we solve for waste, fraud, and abuse without breaking down what is actually working in our government systems today? Now, these type of questions, that's the game changer mindset that we're trying to cultivate for you all. And that's the lens we'll be reviewing this episode under. So let's ground ourselves first in what's actually brought this story into what I would say a national spotlight. Late this month, or in December, I believe, in 2025, just last year, there's a young independent YouTuber, and I don't know if you'd call him an official journalist, but he leads his YouTube channel as he's a journalist. His name is Nick Shirley, and Nick Shirley released this YouTube video that was called "I Investigated Minnesota's $1 billion fraud scandal." Now, this whole video is really focused on what he described as massive childcare fraud in Minnesota, particularly involving kind of nonprofit providers. Now, Nick did not rely on leaked or classified information. Instead, he really just analyzed publicly available government payment records, nonprofit registrations, licensing data, and he conducted on-site visits to childcare facilities listed as receiving large sums of public funding. Now, in the video, he documented himself visiting multiple childcare locations that appear to be closed or inactive, empty during his filming, or inconsistent with the scale of funding they have reportedly received. Now, he walked viewers through spreadsheets, payment data, and records connecting the dots. Many don't really have the time to connect or have not created time to connect the dots on their own. And this matters. His video does not prove criminal guilt, but what it does raise are credible questions about oversight, verifications, and accountability in our government systems. Now, from my perspective, there's a few reasons why this video went viral. Now, Nick's investigation relied on documents that anyone could technically access, but few have actually examined. And his findings are deeply connected to Americans in this moment, where many Americans feel intense financial pressure. There's housing feels out of reach, groceries are more expensive than ever, taxes continue to rise, and people are asking, well, where is all of our money going? And Nick's YouTube video tapped directly into that question. As it spread, public pressure towards government increases, the state of Minnesota has argued Americans really want answers. And shortly after, the state and federal authorities acknowledged ongoing investigations and audits released to childcare funding and other public programs. Now, as I understand it, federal agencies are now involved, audits and reviews are underway, and oversight mechanisms are being examined, and accountability processes are just still unfolding. Now, this is all important for us to understand that we are in an investigative phase. There is no verdict yet. We are not in a verdict phase. But you wouldn't know that because if you're listening to other headlines that have followed this story, that have actually kind of spiraled from this story, you read and you hear as though a verdict has been made. But I want to be clear that we are still under an investigative phase. So let's really slow down in this investigative slate and separate three different things that I believe are really important. So facts, allegations, and the unknowns. Now, most leaders, the greatest leaders, really recognize that we're in an investigative phase and they don't jump into conclusions. They really are trying to understand facts versus allegations versus what is still unknown. And so claims surface all frequently within businesses. So in general, claims focus in any surface, in any business. Claims could look like in a business, sexual harassment claims, there could be theft claims, or altercations or other conduct. And then there's also maybe mishaps or near misses that could happen within a business. A mishap or a near miss that could look like maybe damage to a product or almost great damage, which cost or could cost the company a lot of money or could have great danger to employees or customers. All of these are claims that could surface within a business. And so I really want to tie, this government situation and this claim of fraud, waste, and abuse happening in Minnesota. There are a bajillion different claims that could happen within business and leaders' mindset in response rather than jumping to conclusion. One of the first great things you can do is ask yourself, what are the facts? What are the allegations? And what are the unknowns? And so, again, similarly to this Minnesota fraud case, first step is investigation. Getting clear on what are the facts we have, what are the allegations being made that are missing from the investigation, and is there anything that we still don't know? So let's break those three categories out real quick as it relates to Minnesota. So facts. Investigations and audits are underway and examining specific childcare providers and payments being made through Minnesota's publicly funded child care programs. Another fact, oversight processes are being reviewed. So this includes how providers are being approved, what documentation is required, and how compliance is being monitored once funding begins. And then separately, waste, fraud, and abuse, they're all being examined at the system design level. So, looking at whether the system of the program itself made misuse difficult to detect, slow to surface, or easier to repeat. Now, what are some allegations? So, as reported, claims there are some claims that some specific childcare providers or nonprofit organizations may have improperly claimed or received public funds. So I'm not going to specifically name who those childcare providers are or nonprofit organizations are, but including allegations that reimbursements were submitted for services that may not have been delivered as reported. Other allegations is that documentation submitted for reimbursement may not accurately reflect operational reality, including questions about whether staffing levels matched reported enrollment, whether attendance records and invoices were accurate, or whether required certification or compliance standards were actually met. Now, some unknowns are how widespread is this issue completely, right? Whether the failures are localized or systematic. Is this specific to childcare? Is this specific to Minnesota? Is this specific to nonprofits? Is this a national issue? Now, who knew what and when? These are still unknowns. Like who knew what with and when within the government, within leadership, the people that manage these processes and funds. Who knew what and when did they know it, if at all? And then we also don't know what accountability will ultimately look like. So for those that have known funds are being mismanaged, if anyone at all, and if they did not take action or take the initiative to flag or make change, what will the accountability look like if there are people that knowingly knew this was happening? Now, again, great leadership gets curious on facts versus allegations versus what is the unknown. They get curious before they jump to conclusions, before they declare verdicts are made, before we have the answers. They gather data before they swirl into narratives. jump to conclusions, and jump into solutions. Now, what I want to do is talk about what happened immediately after this story broke. Now, one of the first things that happened that I observed or witnessed once this story broke was blame. That was one of the first things that happens is everybody's trying to figure out who to blame. And depending on what podcast you listen to, what news streams you follow, what your IG feed looks like, you likely heard blame placed on a particular political party. You might have heard blame placed on immigration. You might have heard blame on entire communities like the Somalians or maybe NGOs. Now, in organizations, when things go wrong, depending on the organization and its culture, you likely have heard in your lifetime a department, a leader, or recognize the culture of a business as a whole. The follow up question when something went wrong was, whose fault is it? Now, I've worked in many organizations, and thankfully, this has not been the default. But when you have worked in a diverse number of businesses, I'm starting to learn you will eventually land in a company culture where when something goes wrong, the leadership department, their first question, their first action is a question of whose fault is it? And this question searches for someone to blame. It searches for someone to hold accountable when things didn't go as planned. Now, here's why blame is dangerous from a leadership perspective, is dangerous from a creativity perspective. Here's why blame does not support any of that. Now, first, blame destroys psychological safety. When something goes wrong and the first question is, whose fault is it? People immediately, they shift into survival mode. They stop thinking clearly. They start protecting themselves. And then stories start to form. And stories that don't solve problems, but that really start to avoid being blamed for. Fear takes over them. And when fear is driving the room, everyone starts to feel like the enemy outside of you. And at that point, the goal is not problem solving. It's really self-preservation. Secondly, when blame is at play, it starts to shrink creativity. It collapses the solution space that we are trying to cultivate. So instead of getting curious about what actually happened, what broke down, what conditions led us here, the conversations narrow, the conversation narrows to really finding the person to hold responsible or accountable for. And when this happens, the system doesn't change that we're trying to solve for, right? The process does not improve. The conditions that allowed the issue remain intact. So even if someone is removed from the business, removed from the department, removed from the project, the problem simply shows up again, just in a different place with different people. So, for example, if we say Democrats are the problem for this whole Minnesota shenanigans, then the implied solution becomes removing Democrats from the government. But we all know if you remove a political party, removing that group is not going to solve for a systematic issue that's cultivating waste, fraud, and abuse. In the moment, blame makes us feel better in the moment specifically, but we're not trying to solve for feelings. We're trying to solve for solutions, and blame gives us a false solution. It feels decisive, but it avoids the real work that needs to be done. And this is where our creativity starts to die out because blame replaces curiosity. And curiosity is what drives creativity. You'll hear me say this over and over. Curiosity, curiosity, curiosity. So this is where I want to bring us into foundational coaching tools to support a problem as such. A problem as such in the government. There's a lot of problems in business. There's a lot of problems in government. And so rather than jumping into blame, once we uncover an issue, I want to start helping us cultivate mindsets of curiosity. And by doing that, I want to also give you some fundamental coaching tools that will help you think differently so that you are more solutions oriented. So the first thing here is number one is replacing blame with curiosity. And the best way to lead with curiosity is by leading with powerful questions. You've heard me say this in many, many episodes. Powerful questions cultivate creativity. Powerful questions help cultivate that inner voice, that wisdom, that intuition, that self trust we're trying to activate for you. Whereas closed questions are heavy. They're negative, they're jaded, they bring in that old baggage. And so, some examples in a moment where things go wrong and you're asking a closed question that's heavy and negative and jaded and bringing in that old baggage, that could sound like, whose fault is it? Who should be punished? Who messed up? Right? These are closed questions that point the blame. These questions are narrow thinking, they create defensiveness, and they stop inquiry. Now, powerful, open questions on the other side. They're so curious. They're light. They're full of wonder and possibilities. And examples of what these could sound like alternative to those closed questions. So if something goes wrong, a powerful question to ask when things don't go as expected is, what conditions allowed this to happen? Where did the system fail to catch this earlier? What checks and balances were or are missing or potentially are ineffective? How would we redesign this system if we're speaking specifically to the government? How would we redesign this system if waste, fraud, and abuse prevention was the goal? So these are just some examples of open questions that really expand on the possibilities. They invite solutions instead of outrage. They invite solutions instead of blame. They invite solutions that cultivate collaboration. Now, here's a truth leaders in business understand generally pretty well. Waste, fraud, and abuse rarely happens with one bad actor. They happen because there's a system design gap. And those gaps don't really exist in a vacuum. They often are the result of a system being designed without culture and values intentionally embedded into our systems. So in business, system design gaps could often look like, as an example, incentives tied to volume instead of outcomes, right? A system design gap could look like weak verification before payments are released, or fragmented ownership where everyone involved, no one is clearly accountable. A system gap could look like speed prioritized over controls, or no feedback loops to validate our results. But underneath all of this is really a deeper issue. What did we design the system to value? Because values like integrity, values like accountability, values like doing the right thing, they're not just belief systems. They're actually operational choices. And so in a strong organization, values actually show up on who gets hired. So in our hiring processes, values are incorporated into how decisions are made. Values are incorporated into what gets measured, what we choose to get measured. Values are what systems are built on to prevent risk, not just react to. So sometimes organizations, we get the people part right, in our hiring processes, and sometimes we don't. That's the human part of things, which is exactly why values can't only live in people. They must live in our systems. So think about, as an example, companies that claim safety as a core value, especially if you're a parent. Think of yourself as a parent that wants to buy the safest car for your children. You don't just trust promise slogans on what sounds good. You trust it because of what sits behind those slogans. So if you're trying to buy a new car and you want to ensure it has extreme safety, protocols, features of your car to support your kids, you might do some research, which incorporates rigorous testing standards. You might look for redundant safety features, quality control checkpoints, published processes that ensure safety isn't optional. The safest products don't rely on good intentions alone. They really rely on well-designed systems built around the value of safety. And this is where conversation about waste, fraud, and abuse starts to shift, or can shift, because fraud, whether in business or in government, it isn't just about morality. It's really about the opportunity to create by design. So when systems are built with without clear accountability, embedded verification, outcome based measurements, and values translated into process, they don't just allow for mistakes, they invite misuse. They invite negligence and abuse. Now, again, if this whole situation happened within a company where this fraud of daycare and all of this was exposed, if we were in a business, investors would be demanding an audit, boards would be requiring controls, and leadership would be redesigning an operational model. Not because it's political, but because it's responsible. Now, holding government programs to the same operational standard isn't ideological, it's managerial. It's managerial and responsible. And so, if we believe in a government built on integrity, doing the right thing for the American people, then the question isn't only what programs do we fund with our tax paying dollars. The real leadership questions are what systems ensure those programs produce results? What are the results that they should be producing? How are values translated into controls, verifications, and accountability? And how do we know, not just assume, how do we know that public money is being used as intended? What we're learning through programs like Doge and through Minnesota Child Care case is that many systems were not designed with these questions fully answered. We may also debate from parties, political parties, which programs should exist. But underneath that debate is something more fundamental. Were our systems designed from the beginning to protect integrity, to reduce risk, and to deliver results? And right now, the answer appears to be not consistently. And that's not failure of our values. It's really a failure of our system, the design of our systems. Values do not protect our systems. Systems are how our values are protected. Now, what I want to do is then bring this back into blame versus accountability. So, we just kind of introduced to you some powerful questions. So, this is not the first time you're hearing this. But again, fundamentally, when things go wrong, one of the first things we should be doing is asking powerful questions. Sometimes I even sit with leadership teams and I'm like, what's the right question to ask in this moment? And that's us sitting at a leadership table, when something has gone really wrong and asking together, what's the right question to ask? This is conscious leadership. Again, the default mode that we might have is whose fault is this? But we're trying to cultivate conscious leadership. Now, the other thing, kind of moving into our second coaching tool, if you will, similar with blame, is I want us to understand the difference or how to lead with accountability without blame. So, bringing this back to the human element of our problem and the breakdown of the difference between accountability and blame. Avoiding blame does not mean, I want to be very clear, it does not mean avoid accountability. What it really means is leading responsibly. So, in high reliability environments like aviation, healthcare, or other safety critical systems, leaders operate under what's known as a safe and just culture. And the safe and just culture, in that type of culture that they're trying to cultivate, the goal isn't punishment for its own sake. The goal is learning, prevention, and trust. So, instead of starting with a question like, whose fault is it when things go wrong or things go as unexpected or things break, right? Leaders ask better questions, going back to those powerful questions, especially when public money or vulnerability communities are involved. So when we apply this to Minnesota, those questions could look like, was this a failure in how child care funding was designed and overseen, or was it an individual negligence? Were these issues known, surfaced, or flagged previously, or is this the first clear signal? Were concerns raised by staff, auditors, or outside behaviors? And if so, how were they handled? Was the training, clarity, or oversight missing for those administering or monitoring the program? Because there's a reality leaders really understand with these questions. Sometimes the issue is the system. Sometimes the issue is the human. And sometimes it's both. But If a provider or administrator operated within unclear rules, weak controls, or insufficient guidance, that points to a design and a process failure, not a human failure. But if leaders responsible for oversight were made aware of the problems, and those problems were escalated multiple times, and no corrective action was taken, that's not blame, that's negligence. And leading responsibly means taking action. And that action may include removal from the person of that role, not as a punishment, but as stewardship. What responsible leaders avoid, especially in moments like this, is scapegoating, blaming whistleblowers or citizens, investigators for raising concerns, targeting frontline workers while leaving systems untouched, or performing symbolic firing without fixing the underlying design flaws. Accountability without learning is just blame in disguise. Learning without accountability erodes trust. Minnesota's child care case demands both, from my perspective: clear-eyed accountability and meaningful system improvement. Now, another kind of coaching perspective or leadership perspective I want you to have on this problem is, whenever we're solving for a problem, we want to understand, how big is this problem really? And so another leadership question to ask is, in this particular problem, is this a child care specific issue in Minnesota, or is this a signal of a broader system issue in how governments fund and oversee nonprofits or programs in general? Because if NGOs or other groups receive large sums of public money with limited verification, frequent audits, and little outcome tracking, then this isn't just a childcare issue. It's a government system design issue. And this is where leadership maturity demands to be shown up. Good, great leaders, exceptional leaders, zoom out before prescribing a solution. They don't just ask, how do we fix this here? They ask, where else might this system exist? What happens when the design scales? And what risks are embedded beyond the original used case? And so, kind of taking this from a business and a tech lens, this distinction really shows up clearly in business. And so, let's use as an example a tech example. So think of the difference between a senior engineer and maybe a senior 2 engineer. And if you aren't familiar, a senior engineer, it might be the lead engineer within a program. They are there identifying problems proactively. They're raising issues and bringing solutions for every issue. They're executing well inside their scope of work. And then they might be mentoring other engineers on the product or program that they are leading. Now, if you think of the difference, though, within a senior engineer 2 thinks differently than a senior engineer 1. How, you might say? They think differently. Ideally, if they're performing to the scope of their role, they don't stop fixing the issue in their program. They immediately ask questions of, what happens at scale? Who else touches this process? What happens across teams, departments, regions? What happens when new people come in? And if a process isn't documented, they don't just document it for their team, they document it for an entire department, onshore, offshore teams, future programs that don't even exist yet. And so it's not extra work that they're doing. They have systems thinking. That's not what earns your promotion. That's what separates execution from leadership. And we want to bring this back to Minnesota as an example. This is exactly the leadership lens the Minnesota childcare fraud case invites in. Yes, the issue has surfaced in one state. Yes, it involves childcare funding. But strong leaders don't just stop there. They immediately ask, how is this handled in other states? What other programs use similar funding structures? How are NGOs or other organizations verified elsewhere? What systems exist to ensure outcomes, not just distributions? So this isn't about suspicion. It's about leading responsibly at scale. Because leadership means recognizing that if a system allowed failure once, it may allow failure again or somewhere else. And the Minnesota case may be the signal. The real question is whether leaders treat it as an exception or as an opportunity to examine system design more broadly. So, zooming out doesn't slow down the process, it really prevents repeated failure. And whether you're leading a tech team, a company, or a public institution, the principles are the same. Systems reproduce what they're designed to tolerate. Now, the last kind of coaching tool that I want to incorporate or really highlight and increase your awareness when you are implementing strategies is change management. And this is where I believe Doge and Minnesota intersect. Now, Doge was created with a clear and widely shared goal. Doge's goal was to address waste, fraud, and abuse in government spending. In principle, I believe many people agree with the mission of Doge. Now, Minnesota has now uncovered waste, fraud, and abuse within child care funding systems. Now, the difference here and the opportunity, I believe, in my opinion, lies on change management and change management being considered an execution. Now, where Doge struggled, from my perspective, was not on the intent and the mission. Where Doge has really struggled was on the execution and specifically change management execution. Doge prioritized speed and efficiency, and speed matters. Okay, speed matters. But when execution moves faster than communication, than transparency, when decisions land without context, the human brain starts to fill in the gaps. And it usually fills them with fear. Worst case scenarios. What many people experienced with Doge was funding paused or cut with limited explanation, rapid workforce reductions, people losing their jobs, real organizations unsure on how decisions connected to outcomes. And so that amount of change is hard for any system or organization. And this is where change management becomes critical, not to slow leaders down, but to protect trust while moving forward. And this is where the dance of leadership starts to come in. Change management doesn't mean everybody's going to agree with the strategy and the vision that you're executing on. It doesn't mean everybody's going to stay or be on board. Leadership is a dance, and it's really a dance between how fast do you need to move and how much trust do you need to sustain to move. And there are moments where clarity demands speed, right? Once you have that clarity, clarity demands action. And so with your action, sometimes depending on what clarity you have, that action demands speed, even if it costs you being liked as a leader. And there are moments where slowing down to build understanding protects the very progress that you're trying to make. And that tension is not a failure on leadership. It's leadership. It's leadership as it is. And sometimes leadership requires courage to move forward before consensus exists, to accept the alignment can't be forced, to lead without universal approval. That's where courage may come into play as a leader. But courage without care creates backlash, and care without courage creates stagnation. And this is the core lesson I believe Doge surfaces for leaders everywhere. Execution without change management has the ability to erode trust. We saw it within our nation. But change management without courage can stall progress. Great leadership doesn't choose one over the other. It learns how to hold both clarity and compassion, speed and communication, vision and accountability again and again in real time. And so, bringing this back to the Minnesota story, investigations are currently underway. Audits are in progress. The scope of the problem is still being clarified. What happens next is critical and what really matters. Before sweeping changes can be made, leaders need to understand how big is this problem actually? Where did the system fail? What checks and balances were missing? What's working? What's not working? And this is the moment where change management becomes the lever, not the obstacle, but once facts are clear, then the real question isn't what do we cut? It's really a change management question. How do we redesign the system so this doesn't happen again without harming the people and organizations doing the real meaningful work with stakeholder involvement, which could be including the American people, with clear communication about the why and not just the what. And communication, what I want to reinforce, is not a one time thing. We went out in the world and said, here's the what and here's the why. No, you have to say that over and over and over. It takes repetition to change the minds, to create understandings. And so sequencing change in a way that preserves trust, protects essential services, and builds stronger oversight moving forward. All of this is not a hesitation in strategy. That's disciplined change management. It's how leaders correct systems at scale without creating unnecessary harm in the process. So, this is, from my perspective, where leadership matters most after the investigation and before the execution, because cutting without clarity will create fear once again. But redesigning systems with intention creates the durability that we're looking for. Now, the last kind of coaching note that I want to leave you all related to this story is really related to collaborated problem solving, solving problems together. Now, from a leadership lens, the solution is not adversarial. Anyone receiving government funding should not be treated as default suspect, and government itself should not be treated as inherently incompetent. Blame, whether aimed at a political party, population group, or an institution, does not solve the complex problem here. It really hardens positions, it narrows our thinking, and it delays real progress. And the work here is actually in the co-creation of the solution. And that requires collaboration across our differences. So, why do we say or think or feel that collaboration is both hard and necessary? Well, in business, we don't get to choose who we work with. We don't get to choose to work with only the people we agree with, or even like. That's actually the point of diversity. Different perspectives create friction. And that friction can feel very uncomfortable. But when led well, it also is where solutions, our creativity is born, is cultivated. The challenge isn't eliminating our disagreements. The challenge is in learning how to work through it productively. That same principle applies here with Minnesota. So, a simple framework for collaboration that I want to leave you all to think with in business and in solving for this problem is high performing ecosystems. How do we get them? High performing ecosystems in business, in government, and in communities, they tend to follow a similar pattern. And number one is intentional relationship building first. So collaboration doesn't just start at the table where we're solving the problems, it starts before the table. People solve problems with those they know, they like, and they trust. They believe are acting in good faith. So without relationship building, collaboration meetings become tense, they become defensive and positional. And trust is not soft, okay? It's strategic. Now, number two, lead with common ground. So before debating solutions, align on what you already agree on. So if you're at the table at this point and we're trying to solve a problem and we already know we're at different sides of ideas, solutions, what we want to do first is identify what do we agree on. So for example, in this case, we might say, we agree waste, fraud, and abuse must be addressed. We agree public funds should produce real outcomes. We agree families and children should not be harmed in the process of implementing changes and solutions. So starting here has the opportunity to shift from opposition to shared purpose. And the third item to consider as you're trying to co-create and collaborate effectively, especially through people you may not like or have differences with, is really defining the problem together. So again, this is when you're at the table trying to solve for something. Identifying the problem together might look like, instead of leading with, here's the solution, the better leadership question is, what problem are we actually solving? And what risks do we all agree on? What outcomes do we all want to prevent? What would success look like if this worked? This creates alignment before execution. And why this matters: this is how high-performing systems operate in business, in technology, in healthcare, and in government. Collaboration doesn't mean everybody gets their way. No, it means leaders commit to solving problems together, holding tension without breaking trust, and designing systems that work because multiple perspectives were considered. This is not idealism. This is mature leadership. Now, involving or solving for Minnesota, some questions again that I want to lead you with. And one is, don't lead with, who do we blame? Who or what do we cut first? What or who should be held accountable or be punished? No, do not lead with these questions. Better questions to lead with are, what went wrong? How do we solve for waste, fraud, and abuse without harming what's actually working? What systems would prevent this from happening again? And how do we build systems together? That's leadership. That's creativity. That's how real progress happens. Stay curious, leaders. Stay courageous and stay creative. This episode is for all my leaders. All right, folks, that's all I've got for you. My name is Amanda Escobedo. You have been listening to Game Changer. If today sparked insights, ahas, or new perspectives, I'd be so grateful if you subscribed, left a review, and shared this episode with 3 people in your network who are ready to master the inner game and unlock their potential. Your support helps others discover this resource, invites them to be the next game changer. Join me next time for another conversation on leadership, culture, and creating impact that lasts. Thanks for listening.